Hey YouTube, welcome back to my channel. So this video is going to be about if you are between 2 and 6 months off, whatever medication you took, whether it's benzos or something else, regardless of what type of taper you did, then this video is for you. I wanted to mention before I get into it that I am doing one-on-one coaching. I have a free 15-minute consultation, 30-minute calls, 60-minute calls, and I offer those at lower rates than other places online. I've also packaged together 4-session packages for people who want to meet a little more regularly, and those are at a further discounted rate. And I will put the direct link to my online booking calendar in the description of this video. I will also post the link to my website if you're interested in checking out more of my story. My bio is on there. I've also filmed a couple of fairly long videos that I've posted on this channel about my story, my initial SSRI withdrawal story, and then my reinstatement and adverse reaction story. So feel free to check those out if you're unfamiliar and want to learn more about what I've been through. It's been it was a really awful journey. I guess I say been because I'm still in this community as far as trying to help others. So this video is about if you're 2 to 6 months off. And before I get into the details, also, I wanted to say that this is not medical advice. I'm not trying to speak to every individual person. Obviously, this is a generalization, but it's so common that I feel like I have to make a video on it because so many people ask me about this. It comes up all the time when I'm chatting with people, and it bears talking about because of this. So if you are 2 to 6 months off, whether you took benzos, whether you took antidepressants, antipsychotics, a different drug or combination of drugs, I see this happening all the time with people. So again, this is just a generalization, but it's very common. So even if you did a long Ashton taper, even if you came off too quickly, whatever your situation is, it doesn't seem to matter. It's just this timeline, for whatever reason, is really relevant. So I'll have people ask me all of the time or say to me, I did an Ashton taper, I came off, I was, functional for 2 months or 3 months or 4 months, and then all of a sudden I started getting worse and worse and worse. And my response to that is usually try not to think about it as getting worse, but from my experience in the hundreds of people that I've talked to, the 2 to 6 months off period seems to be the most treacherous for a lot of people. I don't know why, I don't understand why, but a lot of people will crash. I know on Surviving Antidepressants, they talk about the 3-month crash, where a lot of times with antidepressants, people will come off, have a honeymoon period, and then crash into symptoms at 3 months off. And then they'll be like, where did this come from? Especially people who have no prior knowledge of withdrawal, and then they really don't understand what's happening, and their doctor is of no help because, you wouldn't typically correlate symptoms coming off a drug as being withdrawal. If it's, if you were fine and then you crash 3 months later, it almost seems more logical. And this is what doctors will say, is that, oh, your original condition is coming back or progressing or whatever lingo or language they use. And it logically, that makes sense, because it would be like, how could you suddenly have symptoms 3 months off that you didn't initially? And some people are asymptomatic during those first couple of months. Some people are mildly symptomatic. Some people, of course, are bad right off the get-go. But a lot of times people will crash at that point between 2 to 6 months off, and they'll say, I'm just getting worse, like there's something else going on. And I always tell people, of course, it's a good idea to get everything ruled out, like whatever your symptoms may be. If you need an MRI or a CAT scan or SPECT scan or whatever, get it checked out. But 99% of the time, or 99.9% of the time, from what I've seen, is nothing ever shows up on these tests. So I will tell people this is often where people really experience the peak of symptoms. Again, this is a generalization, and not everybody's pattern will follow this, but a lot of people's do. And again, I don't know the reason why, but if you are really struggling in that time frame, try to remember that. I'm saying this for validation because I see it so often. And I want to comment about, I don't even want to call it mindset, because I think right away when you say mindset, it triggers pretty intense emotions sometimes from people, because I am in no way, shape, or form ever saying that any of this is in your head ever. But I just challenge you, because again, I hear so often people saying to me, I went down the rabbit hole, I went on the forums, I was researching this, that, and the other thing, whether it's a specific symptom or benzo withdrawal or bind or whatever it is. And they'll just read YouTube comments under a video and just absolutely spiral, or their symptoms will greatly increase or bring on a wave or whatever it is. And I see that so consistently. That's why in several of my videos I've said you really need to get off these groups. Once you have the knowledge that you're in withdrawal, or you have an injury, or you have limbic system impairment, or whatever you call it, a reaction from coming off these drugs or taking them and having an adverse reaction, whatever it is, once you have that knowledge, that's what you need basically. And then everything else after the basics, kind of understanding what happened, understanding the basic or main symptoms, and that there often is not a lot you can do in the process as far as, taking another drug to cure it. And the general consensus is that people get better over time. Once you know the basics, then usually further research only takes you down rabbit holes and makes you more afraid. And at the end of the day, really what's going on, however I don't understand all of the mechanisms of it. Nobody does. But at the end of the day, we have these heightened nervous system responses. It's a spectrum. Some people, they remain somewhat functional and can work. Other people have very severe reactions, akathisia, but it all has to do with the central nervous system. And so I challenge you, because so many people say, I went down a rabbit hole, was reading the comments, and now I've completely scared myself, it's bringing my symptoms back. How do we know that the reverse can't also be true? And again, I'm not saying there's a magic bullet, there's a cure, that it's all in your head. I'm just saying, if the negative can influence us that much, then maybe the positives, or removing ourselves from those scenarios and focusing on healing and recovery, couldn't maybe at least make a dent in things, or make things at least shift our perspectives in some way. Because again, I do believe that at the end of the day, we are dealing with a hyperreactive, hypersensitized nervous system. I mean, most people experience neurological symptoms, psychiatric symptoms, all of that brain nervous system stuff. And so we're obviously on some type of high alert, and it presents differently in different people. And fear, anger, fear, anger, and hyperexcitability symptoms are the most common. And so we are dealing with a nervous system that's gone awry, essentially. So I think that anything we can do to nurture and stretch is what we need to be focusing on. And exposing yourself to all of the horror and fear can't do any good for anybody. I've never had anybody say to me, I went down the rabbit hole and was reading all of these horror stories, and it didn't really affect me. That's usually only after you've recovered. But when you're in the thick of it, especially when you're in acute, learn sort of the basics and then pull yourself out of that. The only, I think, advantage of staying in the groups or being in the groups past that point of general knowledge is to find healing buddies. That's one of the things that I do as a coach, is I will, help people one-on-one as much as I can, but I will also connect them to each other, because I get to know people on a very personal level when I'm talking to them, as opposed to just reading a thread on a forum, and then I get indications of, who might be a good fit. And a lot of times people will say to me, I need someone to talk to who's going through this. So I've connected people pretty successfully to each other. And I think that, so I could do that for people rather than them having to do it in the forums. But I understand that that can be a good connection in that sense as well. I mean, I met my own support group through my old YouTube channel and through online groups, Facebook groups, and I'm not in those anymore. But that can be the one positive thing, I think, past the general knowledge point of these groups. And so I just challenge people, to try to, I'm not talking about toxic positivity and denying the situation that you're going through. I have made videos, or a video about the grieving process and how it's very similar to the stages that people go through in withdrawal. There's the shock of it, and then there's the the bargaining and the depression and the anger and the acceptance, it is somewhat similar in a lot of ways. And so it is a process. Again, there's no quick fixes. There's no magic bullet, magic pill, whatever. If there was, we wouldn't be in this situation. But I just challenge you to like remove yourself from that negativity and focus on your full recovery, however that looks. In my opinion, how that typically looks for people is you're nurturing and soothing the nervous system as much as you can, and then stretching yourself a little bit to go, I guess, outside of your comfort zone or outside of your day-to-day routine that you've been in acute. When your symptoms start to, you get space from them, or you go into a window, or however you want to word it, I think that is the best approach personally, because I think too, there is a, what's the right word I'm looking for? There is something to exposing yourself to normal everyday situations to teach the subconscious and the limbic system, which is the fight or flight response in the brain and the nervous system, that it's safe again. So I think that there's phases. I like to break withdrawal up into 3 phases. So you have acute, which in my definition is not as much a timeline. Well, the peak is typically 2 to 6 months, typically, but I think it's more when you're in symptoms constantly and you really don't have breaks. So you don't have windows, you don't have any space. You're just living in the withdrawal experience 24/7. And then I think when you move into subacute, either you break up things break up into windows and waves, or you start to just have, I guess it would be the same way as the same thing as getting some space between your symptoms. That's typically how a window will feel. I think that's when you need to start stretching yourself a little bit. And then protracted is often, past the 18-month mark. I guess that one is a little bit more of a timeline, or past the 2-year mark, kind of in there when you're still symptomatic. You might have windows and waves. You might be in a continuous wave still, however it looks for you. I think protracted is typically after 18 months to 2 years. And that's typically how they define it in the groups. But I don't think people ask me too, well, how am I supposed to stretch the nervous system, or how am I supposed to apply whatever they might be doing? It could be a brain retraining program if they purchased one of those or whatever. They're like, how do I do that in acute? And again, my personal opinion is that you can choose to still go through those things, whether you're doing an neuro-linguistic programming or like DNRS or primal trust or any of those things. I think you can still do those in acute, but I wouldn't expect too much as far as sort of a return on your investment, like where you're getting reprieve from your symptoms based on what you're doing. I think that it can still be okay as long as it's not making your symptoms acutely worse. I think you can participate in those things in acute, but I wouldn't expect a whole lot in return because you are in the most heightened state in your acute phase. But I think it can help you to develop good habits and things you could maybe implement more when you're subacute or protracted that could really help you. I think it benefits. It keeps the hope going. I think it can build healthy habits that you could get more of a return of investment on further in your recovery. And I think it can get you into a routine. And again, I think it is important for some people or a lot of people when they move into subacute and protracted to start stretching themselves and teaching their subconscious. It's not like it's a formal process always necessarily, but exposing yourself to normal things to, I guess, subconsciously teach your subconscious mind that it's safe again, if that makes sense. These are my own personal philosophies and all of the things that I've studied and learned in the last 6 years that I've been in this space. But I just wanted to say that because especially about the 2 to 6 month, because I just see it happening so often with people that it's definitely a pattern. And I find myself having these conversations with people over and over and over. So I'm like, why don't I just put this into a video? Let me know your thoughts. I actually was going to read, I found in my journal from 2021. So I've been drug-free since February of 2021. This was, I believe, in July. So I was 5 months off, and I had written in my journal, and I wish I could access it right now, but my daughter's sleeping in the room where it's in. So, because I thought about reading it out loud, but it went into grave detail, the physical and emotional distress that I was in. I said something like my body is contorting. It's, it throws itself off of chairs. It's frightening beyond belief. And then, my mind was just looping on the most horrific horror images, sensations. I mean, my whole experience was just an absolute living horror movie nightmare. And I was expressing in that journal entry my exit plan, if you know what I mean, and what I was going to do to end my suffering. So I experience, it's hard for me to sometimes remember or even want to recall how painful it was. So that's one of the reasons I would write things down, not perfectly, but I would try to write things down every once in a while. Maybe I was very consistent then. I don't think I was yet, but because now that I can look back and have more concrete examples, it again sort of reiterates this. Like, my own experience was 5 months off. Like, I was really, really, really bad. So I just wanted to mention that again. It was, and that was in my second withdrawal after the reinstatement and the trialing all the different drugs, including 3 months of benzos. But even in my first withdrawal, when I was more functional and I wasn't as bad then, I do remember the first 6 months, because I came off the drug in April of 2018, and September, October, like in there, I was calling mental health crisis and was then referred to a psychiatrist because I didn't understand then what I do now. And so I just had no idea what was going on. I didn't have a movement disorder, akathisia yet, but I had the mental stuff already in that first withdrawal. And it was enough to warrant mental health crisis. Like, I had such overwhelming neuro emotions and, panic attacks and crying all the time. And I just thought it was life stress, but it didn't make sense to me because it was so sudden. And, intrusive thoughts and looping and, like physical stuff, like the brain zaps. I guess I was just like, they happened only in the first month, and those I knew about, and I knew they were connected to antidepressants. So I just thought I was in withdrawal that first month that I had brain zaps. But then once they went away, I had no idea that what I was continuing to experience, was still from coming off the drug. Like, I had no knowledge of withdrawal syndrome whatsoever. And, but the first 6 months were hell in the first one as well, but not as bad as the second set of drugs. But yeah, I really struggled at 5 and 6 months off both times. So I just wanted to mention that, and maybe it'll give you a little bit of comfort in knowing that, and knowing that that's very typical and very common for people. So yeah, I hope you guys are doing okay. Let me know in the comments if this was your experience as well, and I'll see you next time. Bye.